you very much. I'm happy to be with you again today. And I want to say before we start, go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay. So our talk today is called Memory and Age of What We Worry. And I like to start with that particular idea of what we worry. Because one of the things I studied for decades as a professor was the way people worry about aging. So I'm hoping that by the end of this talk today, that you will be less worried about aging than you are now. That will be a success if I can accomplish that. Go ahead. So the key word today is search. Last time the key word was what? R. Last time the key word was R, and I talked about attention, review, and meaning. Today, the A and the R are going to be attention and review again, because they are so important for memory. But I like the fact that for many, many years, for decades, I have given talks using the Q search to talk about aging. And so it's amazing that I'm giving this talk for searching for identity, because search is an important word in the way Stacy thinks about her work as well. So when we talk about search, we're going to talk about speed, evaluation, attention, review, challenge, and health. And I want to point out to you that you all have a handout today. If you haven't picked it up, get it off the table.
Give us a second.
Okay,
There's a backup on every table.
So there are 12 critical slides in my talk. And this handout shows you all 12 critical slides. And you can take it with you. And the reason I'm doing that is because all of this information is really important for understanding aging. And today we have a little more detail than we did last time. So I want you to have the handout. Please note the title is at the front page of the handout. And on down the left side, it says speed, evaluation, and attention. So those are the first 3 slides we're going to do. So as you follow along, you'll go down the left side of your handout, and then we'll go down the right side of the handout. And then we'll turn it over and we'll go down the left side, down the right side. Okay. So let's talk about speed first. So one of the things that happens as we get older is that we become slower at learning. And what that means in general is that if something goes past us very, very quickly, we cannot catch it. We cannot even attend to it. We cannot even put it into memory. And I'm always very conscious when I'm talking about this to speak a little slower to the group, because if I'm talking too fast, then I can guarantee that you are not getting the information that I'm giving you. So if at any point later today, I get really excited and I start talking too fast, just wave your hand at me to remind me to slow down, okay? Because as we get older, as we get older, we have trouble processing information that comes by too quickly. And I had an experience I want to tell you about this. Many years ago, my husband and I were watching a World Series baseball game. And an ad for the Alzheimer's Association came on with a phone number. And you gotta believe me, this phone number whizzed me by. It was way, way too fast. And I said to myself as a gerontologist, this is not good, because the caregivers who need that phone number are probably older themselves, or they're in middle-aged sons and daughters of the person who has dementia. So this phone number is way too fast. So I had to sit by the TV set with my pad and my pencil and wait for that ad to be shown 3 times before I could get that number down. I was in my 50s. So it was not good. And I called them and I said, look, this is a problem. This number needs to be presented more slowly. And it actually changed that before the World Series was over. So I was very happy about it. Because I
were playing. Teach playing.
I don't pay attention to it that much. Attention.
So maybe you were reading while they put it up.
I was probably reading. My husband says I brought a book to the first game we went to. I really don't think that's true, because that's what he says. Okay. So the second thing that happens is we're slower at retrieval, which means when we're pulling something out of our brain something that we know very well. It may not be there when you want it to be there. And it particularly happens when you're trying to introduce someone who you don't know that well. I mean, you know them, maybe you've been a member of the synagogue with them for many, many years, they're acquaintance, they've had multiple conversations with you. But when you want to introduce them to somebody, the name does not come. And that's a common experience, and it occurs because our minds are slower. Now, you may, last time I talked to you about networks, how we have connected information in our brain, like if we have birds and feathers and nests and egg and robin, these are all connected in our brain. And what happens is that we work through those connections, those networks, more slowly as we get older. So it's harder sometimes to retrieve information that we want to say. This leads to word finding problems where you're trying to use a word in a sentence and you say, wait a minute, I'm lost, I have to start over, I can't find that word. And that's a common thing that happens in aging. And it's also common to have difficulty recalling something that you know that you know. Now, one of the things that happens, and we have a ton of research about this, which is why I put it up first. We are actually slower. You're not gonna believe this. We are actually slower starting in our mid-20s. We are our fastest. Our brain is its fastest in our mid-20s. So those of you in here who are probably in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, it's already happened. Have you noticed it? Probably not. Okay, so I wrote my book years ago called Memory Fitness Over 40, because most people notice it by the time they are 50. Somewhere in their 40s, they'll start to notice this slowing process. Now, you haven't lost that much if you're 40 or if you're 50, because in our mid-20s, we're our fastest, and we lose milliseconds every year. It's not a lot of speed we lose every year, but it is a steady decline over time. Okay, so that by the time we're in our mid-70s, like me, we definitely noticed it. Okay, so if you're doing something complex, you notice the slowing even more because each step along the way is slowed a little bit. Okay, next slide. So, evaluation. This is something that I studied a good part of my career. One thing is that stereotypes are very powerful. I'm sure you've seen the stereotypes about memory and aging. These are two of the many, many cartoons I have representing this stereotype. On the left, the character is saying, I don't miss being young, but I might if I could remember what it was like. And the picture on the left is showing an old elephant. Some of you may know that elephants are associated with remembering. And the elephant is opening up his brain and he is out of memory. So these are just two of the many cartoons you can find and many comics who make jokes about aging and memory. It's a very powerful stereotype. And part of the reason that it's so powerful is because when you were young, when I was young, maybe not when some of you were young, not sure when you were all born, but in the 70s, in the 1970s is when the discoveries were made that senility was not a normal part of aging. Until the 1970s, the best minds in the country believed that senility or dementia was a normal part of aging. We now know that it is not, but think about it. You know, I was in my 20s before I heard that. So I have already spent a couple of decades hearing the best minds tell me that memory decline was a normal part of aging. So that stereotype has a lot of power still, and especially for in the older generation, because they're going to have some memory problems. Memory problems are normal as you get older. That's what I'm talking about today. But there's a tendency to say, oh, well, it must be dementia, it must be senility. We'll talk about that more later. The reason that is so dangerous is because it leads to the second thing, which is a low self-concept. When I evaluated people's beliefs about their memory, when they were in their 20s versus when they are in their 70s, people in their 70s have a very low concept. They have low memory self-efficacy is what we call it. They are not confident about their abilities, even when their abilities are very good. And that is a problem. And that is why many times when I get out of these talks, people say, oh, I feel so much better now. Because I tell them that a lot of what's happening to them is a normal part of aging, and it's not that stereotype we talk about, which is senility. It's also important because there's this amazing research that shows that people who are asked their opinions about aging, they're asked a variety of different questions, what they believe is gonna happen to them as they get older. And then the researcher, whose name is Becca Levy, she divides the group into those people who are mostly positive about aging and those people who are mostly negative about aging. And then she followed them over years, over decades, to see what happened to them. And she found that those people that had a negative view of aging were 12% more likely to have a heart attack, a stroke, Parkinson's disease. Not only that, but the people who were negative about aging died at a younger age on average than those people who were positive about aging. Okay? The reason that happens will become more clear as I talk about what you can do to master the age problems that you have. But if you believe that those age problems are inevitable, you don't do anything. Why should I exercise? I'm gonna fail anyway, right? So that low self-concept is very dangerous. Okay? The third thing we want to talk about is attention, which I mentioned last time. Last time I told you that attention is very important to memory. There are two aspects of attention that seem to change with age. One is distraction. We are much more distractible as we get older. And here is Superman. He's standing on the windowsill and he's saying, dang, now where was I going? He got distracted, okay? And this happens to us all the time. We walk into the bedroom, we're gonna pick something up. When we get there, we can't remember what we gotta get. We have to trot back to the kitchen and look around and remember what we were going there for, okay? That is because of distraction, okay? And it is more likely to happen as we get older, increased distractibility. A second thing that happens is difficulty with switching attention. So everybody has to switch attention sometimes. So you're reading a book and the phone rings, so you have to switch your attention to the phone call. Or you're working on your lecture, your presentation for search for identity, and your husband interrupts you, comes in with a question, right? So that means that you have to switch your attention. As we get older, it's very difficult to switch attention. It's difficult to get back to what we were doing because we were interrupted, and it takes us longer to switch effectively. Again, that's the speed thing. So you have to be very careful about these two things and be aware of them, and I'm going to talk about what you can do about them in a minute. You can also be distracted by certain kinds of sounds if you have a hearing problem. Low background sounds actually are very distracting if people have a hearing problem. So you want to be careful about that. Okay, next slide. All right, we've done the what's bad about speed, what's bad about attention, what's bad about evaluation. So now if you go down the right side, we're now going to talk about what you can do about it. That's the fun stuff, right? So for speed, in thinking about what we worry, the first thing you want to do is ask people to slow down. If they're talking too fast and you want to remember what they're saying, ask them to slow down. That's not a big deal. No problem, okay? Second thing you want to do is you want to take the time you need. If you need more time, take the time you need. One of the things I do when I'm preparing talks now in my mid-70s is I spend more time developing my talks. I spend more time practicing my talks. When I was lecturing as a professor and I was lecturing every day, I didn't reread my talks. I just prepared them and gave them. Now I'm preparing them, I'm looking at them again, I'm looking at them again, I'm taking the time so that if I got distracted when I was looking it over one day, I might, the next time I look at it, see something that I wanted to say that wasn't in my notes. These are my notes. Okay, so important to do that. Third factor is don't stress over forgetting. If you try to introduce somebody and the name is not there, don't stress. Why? Because anxiety blocks memory. Anxiety is a guaranteed memory block. You do not want that anxiety to interfere with your ability to retrieve that name. And the next thing you wanna do to try and retrieve that name is you wanna work around the name. So I've talked to you about our networks, our brain networks, and how everything is connected. So if you can't remember that person's name, you relax first of all. Don't say, gotta have it, gotta have it, gotta have that name. That's the worst possible thing you can do. Instead, you say, oh, when did I meet this person? How long have I known this person? Do I see this person in the synagogue or the grocery store? What do we talk about when we're together? Okay, you go around your network of connections to that person and try to find another way in, because thinking about a name didn't get you to the name. So you relax, you think about these other things, and I tell you, your brain does that even if you don't do it yourself. Why? Why do we know that? Because you wake up at 2 AM and the name pops in your head, right? So we know your brain tries to do that anyway. But if you're in the situation and you would like to retrieve that name, just relax and say, I don't have your name right now, please introduce yourself. But then you can try and do this workaround to see if you can connect to it. This happened to Ken the other day when he was here. He was trying to remember somebody that he knew from here and couldn't remember the name. And then he told me about 20 minutes later that he had done this workaround and it came to him what the name was. And he wasn't in a tight situation where he had to introduce somebody, but still it was important to him to try and reprocess it and get to that name that he knew that he knew. Okay. The other thing you want to do is practice for speed. If you want to be faster at doing something, practice doing it, because the more you practice doing that particular kind of memory activity, the faster you will be at doing that memory activity. There's a lot of research to show that people can improve their speed if they work on it, if they practice it, if they take some effort to try and improve that. Okay. So now we're going to, one other thing I wanted to mention is that I am having fewer word finding problems giving these talks than I used to have when I was lecturing. Now, part of that may be because I'm reviewing the talk more often, so I'm using those words right before I come out to give the lecture. But I wonder if it's also because of the practice I'm getting with word retrieval, because I do a lot of games. I do a lot of word retrieval games. I do crossword puzzles. I do the spelling bee on the New York Times. I do the World and a couple of others. These are word retrieval exercises. And I suspect, even though I have no proof, I suspect that one of the reasons that I'm not having as many word finding problems is because I'm practicing more word retrieval. So that speed is better for word retrieval for me. Possibility. Okay. Now we'll go to evaluation. So I love this cartoon. Growing old doesn't bother me, dear. I put the emphasis on growing. Okay. This is what I need you to do. I need you to put the emphasis on growing instead of the older part. So you need to, first of all, reject those stereotypes. Don't believe that automatically you are going to lose your memory as you get over 60, as you get over 70, as you get over 80. It shouldn't happen automatically. You will have some problems. Those are the ones I'm talking about, but you will not lose your ability to remember. And we know that it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to reject those stereotypes. One of the things that I wonder about sometimes is that some people find that when they forget something, it's easy for them to say, oh, I have a senior moment. And I wonder about whether that's good or not. I haven't decided, because on the one hand, if you're saying every time you forget, I have a senior moment, then you're saying that every time you forgot, your aging was the reason you forgot. And I'm going to talk later about the fact that there are many other factors that make us forget. So it's not always aging that makes us forget. On the other hand, saying that we have a senior moment kind of makes us relax. It's less stressful, it's less anxiety provoking if you just sort of laugh and say, oh, I had a senior moment. So I haven't decided if it's good or bad. But I do want you not to believe those stereotypes. That's really important. Okay. Next thing. Okay. Notice your successes. Okay, I said this to Janine once this morning, she remembered something, and I said, you remember that. One of our problems, everybody's problem, is that they notice every failure and they do not notice every success. You have to notice your successes, you have to be able to say to yourself, oh, I found my way to Publix. I remember, no, I'm sorry, seriously, because when you have a serious memory problem, you will not be able to find your way to Publix, okay? So I found my way to Publix, I remembered those 2 items on my grocery list. I remembered the names of 5 people that I saw today. I remembered that I had to come here and hear this talk, okay? Notice your successes, do not take them for granted. That's what we usually do, we take them for granted, do not do that. A third thing you wanna do is you want to do the memory tasks that you're good at. You wanna practice those memory tasks that you are good at, so you can feel good about your memory. Feeling good about your memory is important. You want to throw away the stereotypes, you want to feel good about your memory, and so you want to do those memory tasks that you can do. For me, I'm pretty good at remembering numbers and addresses. So when I'm going to a new address, I will write the address down, then put the piece of paper away and try to remember that address until I get there. And sometimes I have to check because I didn't remember northwest or southeast, but most of the time I can remember that address. And that gives me a positive memory experience. So if you're good at numbers, if you're good at names, if you're good at locations, practice doing that and enjoy the fact that you're good at it. Appreciate the fact that this is something that you can do. Okay. Then finally, and this is probably the most important thing, is to not say to yourself every time you have a memory failure that it was a senior moment. And in the workbooks that you're getting next time, there is a long list of the reasons why we forget, and I have some of them here as well. Go ahead, Stacey. So, fatigue is a reason we forget. And if we have a health issue on top of fatigue, then it often consumes us. If we're having a health issue, if our spouse is having a health issue, it consumes us. We're thinking about it all the time. It takes up some cognitive space, which makes it harder for you to use that cognitive space for memory. A second thing is stress or overload. I'm talking to my daughters about this all the time. Both of my daughters have 2 kids and very high-powered jobs. And they say, you know, Mom, should I worry about the fact that I forgot this or I forgot that? And I said, no, you are overloaded. You have a huge amount of information to remember on a regular basis. So don't stress about that. That's actually pretty normal. So you're overloaded that you're gonna forget a lot of things. Third, time has passed. So if you haven't seen somebody you know in the synagogue, if you haven't seen them for months and months and months, as in COVID, we didn't see people for months and months and months and months, you're gonna forget their name. Time passes. You don't use the name, you forget the name. Interruption or interference, very, very important, because it takes your attention. Remember, attention is important for memory. Interruption or interference takes your attention away from what you're hearing, what you're doing, and that means that you're likely to forget it. Lack of attention, likely to forget it. Lack of effort, likely to forget it. Then there comes to the glasses and the hearing aid. You would not believe how many times I have given a talk and someone in the audience will tell me later, well, I had trouble with this because I didn't bring my glasses today. And I'm like, why did you not get your glasses? Why did you not bring your hearing aid? Why is it my responsibility to speak so loudly that you can hear every word when you didn't bother to bring your hearing aid? So if you don't hear it clearly, if you don't see it clearly, you are less likely to remember. And then at the very bottom, we have aging, okay? So there are all these other reasons why we forget. There are all these other factors that affect our memory. This list is also in the workbook you get next time, so don't stress about writing it all down. It's really important not to always say to yourself, I did this because I'm 65. I did this because I'm 70. I did this because I'm 78. You know, there are all kinds of reasons why we forget. And if we know them, we can try to prevent them, right? We can try to get around them as I'm talking today. But it's very important not to always say to yourself, I forgot this because I was older. Okay, so last topic in this first half is attention. What do we do about the fact that we are more distractible and that we have difficulty switching attention? So the first thing you want to do is when you're working on something that you want to remember, clear your desk. Tell your spouse not to come in, turn off the radio, okay? No distractions. Then you also, that's the first one. Remove external distractions. The second one is to take care of those internal distractions. What do I mean by that? Well, you're sitting there, you're practicing your talk that you're gonna give, and all of a sudden you start thinking about what you're gonna wear to the party tomorrow night. Or you start thinking about the friend that you're gonna see in 3 days, or what's on your schedule for tomorrow. Those are internal distractions. They're just as problematic, even though they came from you. But what you want to do is to have a little pen and paper, like these little notepads, next to your desk with a pencil or pen. And when you start thinking about what you're gonna wear on Thursday instead of your talk on Monday, you write yourself a little quick note about what you thought about. Whatever popped in your head, just make yourself a quick note. That allows you to push it out of the way so that you don't need to pay attention to it right now. Or if you remember that you want to call a friend and invite her to a party, write her name down. And then again, you can put it out of your mind, you can focus on what you're working on. Okay. Third thing is just to really make yourself focused, to lock in your brain, if you will. And one of the things that happens to me and to Ken sometimes, because we're both in our 70s, we both are still doing cognitive tasks as part of our volunteer life or work life, if you will. And we get ourselves so locked in. We really work to make sure we get really locked in on what we're working on. And sometimes that means that you're late for an appointment because you got so locked in. But you have to do that when you get older. You have to really work to lock your brain in on what you're working on so that you don't lose track of things, so that you don't get distracted. So you have to really concentrate. And sometimes that means that you concentrate so much that you go late for your Pilates appointment. Okay. So for switching, in terms of switching and keeping track of the switching process, you want to give yourself a second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever it takes. You want to pause before you switch attention. So if you're reading a book and the phone rings, you're going to answer the phone. You think about where you are in the book. Oh, they just introduced this new character, Kelly. She's a friend of the main character. Kelly is a doctor. Take that 5 seconds to just say to yourself where you were in the story. Then you pick up the phone. Now, it's not a guarantee that when you get off the phone, you're going to remember where you were in the story, but it will help. It will help you do the switching. Now, there's another aspect of switching attention and distraction that's extremely important, and that is what happens when you put down your keys, when you put down your phone, when you put down your glasses, right? Do you remember where you put them? Maybe. So, this is really important. Pause when you put down your glasses. Take a look, say, oh, I just put my glasses on the kitchen table. That doesn't take very long. It just takes getting in the habit of not allowing yourself to just put it down and run off. Because if you put it down and run off, you switch your attention to something else. You haven't paid any attention to where you put down your phone or your glasses or your keys, and you will forget where they are. You will end up running all over the house to find them. Anyway, hold on to your questions, write yourself a note.
Has to do with what they learn, because,
What?
how does that differ between, no matter how old you are, glass half empty, glass half full? I've always liked to think of myself as somebody as glass half full.
I'm not sure what you're asking me.
About worry, okay, my husband may rest in peace, he would worry in advance. it didn't necessarily. It wasn't gonna happen, but he would always, oh, what if blah, blah, blah.
Right, so choosing to
And
work
that started, I met him when he was 19 years old. So,
Yeah.
You could,
personality factor, some people worry more than others, but we have a greater tendency to worry about the aging process because we've been told our whole lives about the stereotypes. So I'm trying to say to you, if you can do these things, you can take care of some of those problems that are a normal part of aging, and it will help you not to have to worry. If you're not a worrier, it's fine, okay, so we need to go on. So we've done speed, we've done evaluation, we've done attention, and we talked about what to do about speed issues, what to do about attention issues, what to do about evaluation issues. Now we're gonna do the last three of our letters. We did the S, the E, and the A. We're now gonna do the R, the C, and the H. The R is review. Last time I talked to you about review, and I said that review was extremely important. But one of the things that happens as we get older is that we need more review time. If we're gonna learn something, we need more review time. We need to take that time to review it. I've practiced this talk about 5 or 6 times because I need more review time, and I know that. The passing of time also affects the ability to access information. So this little guy, this little cartoon guy, is trying to find a specific memory in his brain. He's fishing for it, right? He's fishing for a specific memory in his brain. And there are lots of memories in there. And it's hard for him to find the thing he wants. So he needs to try and make that thing that he wants to remember more accessible. Now, for years, I used to say, I think that one of the things that happens as we get older is that we have more memories. I have 75 years, 74 years of memories. Some other people in here maybe only have 40 years of memories. And I thought that was important. I thought that was part of why we had trouble finding specific memories. You know, because after all, when I was young, I knew my whole Vita by heart. And when I had been doing research for decades, I couldn't tell you all the things on my Vita. After that, there were too many things there. So luckily, in the last 10 years, I guess about 8 or 7 years ago, a psychologist did a research study proving that I was right. And I love that. So what he did was he did a simulation of going through networks when you have very few items, going through networks when you have lots of items, going through networks in the brain when you have tons and tons of items in your brain. And he established that if you have more items in your brain, it is harder to find them and you're more likely to have difficulty with accessibility. So I was so glad that he did that research to demonstrate that. We have trouble as we get older with accessing things that we know. I already mentioned this, okay? So it's really an important issue. Okay. So this picture is of something called a wacky wall walker. Some of you may have seen it, some of you may have not seen it. But new learning is a challenge as we get older. It is harder specifically to learn something new, especially if it's not connected meaningfully, because we talked about meaning last time, especially if it's not connected meaningfully to something you already know. New learning is definitely more difficult as we get older. And I like to use the wacky wall walker as an example. If you have not seen this toy, it's a little rubbery toy, it's a little sticky, the kids throw it at the wall, and it starts to slide down the wall. So one leg will slip, and the next leg will slip, and then the next leg will slip, and eventually it will fall off the wall. But when you get older, if you throw things at the wall to stick, they drop. They drop. And you have to do something special to hold on to them. Now, I know the wacky wall walkers, they get dirty over time, and then you have to wash them to make them work again, you know, whatever. But what I have noticed for myself is as I have gotten older, things don't stick as well as they used to, especially new information. So you have to make that extra thing happen to make it work. And the one thing that I really noticed is where I put things in my suitcase. So when I travel, when I was younger, I would just sort of, I'm not super compulsive about organizing my suitcase. I would just sort of throw things in there and be fine. But then at some point in my sixties, I started having trouble remembering where things were in my suitcase. So I would have to basically tear through the whole suitcase to find something. So now I'm very organized about the way I put things in my suitcase so that I know, the pants are always there, the shirts are always there, the shoes are always there, the extra items that might be, a phone charger or whatever, they're always there. So that I don't have to do that anymore because things don't stick when I pack my suitcase. So again, you have to be aware of this stickiness issue. Go ahead.
I forgot.
No, I'm ready for a change just now. You can get behind. Okay. So the reason it's really problematic that we have this challenge is that it leads us to avoid using our memory. I shouldn't be talking to you guys. You're all here. You've already accepted the challenge of listening to a detailed talk, a detailed presentation. So you've accepted that challenge, but how many of your friends would say, I don't want to do that, I don't want to invest it, I don't want to have to keep my brain awake for an hour. The avoidance of challenge, the avoidance of memory tasks is a huge problem with the fact that things are a little bit less sticky, it's a little bit harder to learn. We back off and we say, okay, I'm not going to do that, it's going to be too hard. That's a problem. You should not avoid that challenge. If you avoid that challenge, trust me, you are going to lose your ability. If you avoid that challenge, if you avoid using your memory, you're going to lose your memory skills. That's true for everything we do. Anything, any kind of skill that we don't use, we're going to lose. Use it or lose it. Okay? Really important. Okay. So the H. Now on the H, I'm going to talk about what we have not lost. Okay. Talking about memory health, things that we retain. So the first aspect of this message is to make a distinction between normal aging and dementia. What I've been talking about today is normal aging. It is not dementia. Let me give you a few examples of the difference between the two. So one of my favorite examples is somebody who has been a cook their whole life. They've always followed recipes. As they get into dementia, they have trouble following recipes. They forget the ingredients, they forget the process, they forget how to find the recipe that they want, okay? Another example is somebody who's always made coffee every morning their whole life. And now they're forgetting the procedures that you have to follow to make coffee and where they have the coffee in their cupboard, okay? Another example that I'd like to give is a person who goes to the shopping mall with a friend. And you planned ahead of time if you were going to go to the shopping mall with your friend. You made a date, you were there on time when she came to pick you up. You talked to her in the car all the way to the shopping mall. You did a little shopping together, and then you decided that you wanted to go to two different stores. So one of you is going to Macy's, the other one's going to Dillard's, and you're going to meet up in exactly an hour in front of Macy's. Okay. So you spent all this time hanging out with your friend, planning to be with your friend, being in the car with your friend, but the time that you spend thinking about where you're going to meet and when, usually it's like 2 seconds. So it would not be surprising, normal aging, if you forgot where and when you're meeting your friend. That's okay. But you should not forget that you went to the shopping mall with your friend because a lot of review time was spent on that critical piece of information. So that's kind of the distinction we're trying to make between normal aging and dementia. Now, everybody loses their keys, right? People lose their keys in their 30s, they lose their keys in their 20s. I'm sure many of you have left your keys somewhere and had to go find them. In dementia, that's going to happen more often. It's also going to happen more often that you're going to put your keys in a very odd place. Occasionally, it's okay. You put your keys in the refrigerator, it's okay. But if you put your keys in some weird place all the time and you can't find them out somewhere, that's a problem. That means you're not thinking correctly about keys. Or if you forget what the keys are for, you pick them up and say, why are these here? That's a real problem, okay? So I'm trying to get you to understand the difference between normal aging and dementia. Dementia is a whole other level of not being able to do, especially things that are, you've spent a lot of review time on and things that you always did. You can't find your way to Publix anymore, even though you've been there many, many times. So That's the difference. Now let's talk about the things that we don't lose as we get older. So we don't lose our world knowledge. Okay, you will not forget the vocabulary that you've always known. If you've always known the temperature that water boils, you will not forget the temperature that water boils. And if you don't know it, that's okay. My husband doesn't know it. My husband doesn't know how many teaspoons there are in a tablespoon. I do, and I shouldn't forget that because that's basic knowledge that I have. If you're someone who's always known the capitals of 10 or so southern states, you should still know most of those capitals. That is your world knowledge, and we maintain that as we get older. And one of the things I love at the holidays is playing Trivial Pursuit with my children. And Ken loves to play Trivial Pursuit, he's extremely good at it. If any of you ever want to lose Trivial Pursuit, play with Eve Ackerman, who's Howard Rosenblatt's wife. She's amazing. She and Ken together, I think, would be unbeatable. But anyway, the kids say, you know, especially when they were at college, they thought they were hotshot, smart people, right? Oh, we want to play kids versus parents. And I would say, yes, because I knew that we had more world knowledge than they did, and we always won. We always won because we don't forget that world knowledge that we have just because we're in our 60s or 70s. Another thing we don't lose is our immediate memory. Immediate memory. I have to tell you the conditional requirements for this. Immediate memory is you sitting down with no distractions, knowing you have to remember something, and being given that small piece of information. The research has shown that people can remember 7 plus or minus 2 items. If they're in that situation where they're asked to remember and they're given a memory test within a minute, you should not forget 7 plus or minus 2 items. Although sometimes when we get older, it might be 6 plus or minus 2, but basically, no distractions, knowing you have to remember, paying attention, you can usually get every 6 plus or minus 2 items. The good thing about that is it means that you can hold on to the information long enough to do more with it if you want to remember it later. But that doesn't guarantee you remember it later, it just guarantees that you remember it right away within a minute. The third thing that doesn't change with age is forgetting rates. I love this one. So takes you longer to learn, right? You have to practice and practice and practice. Let's say that somebody has asked you to memorize a paragraph because you're going to give an introduction to somebody in a talk, right? And you want to memorize that introduction, and you have to work on it, and you have to work on it, and you have to study, and you have to study with no distractions. And you have to think about what it means to you and make connections to your past so that you can give that talk. Once you've learned it, once you've mastered it, and you can sit down and say it, you're not going to forget it tomorrow. You're not going to forget it 2 hours later. You're not going to forget it 6 hours later. You're not going to forget it 2 days later. Except I should say, you're not going to forget it any faster than a 20-year-old would. Everybody's going to forget some of it. But the research shows that if you make the effort to learn something and learn it well, you are not going to forget it any faster than that 20-year-old forgets it. So that's really a great thing to know. Okay, so these are aspects of memory health. Okay, so now we have to do the what me worry part. Okay, we talked about review. We talked about that we need more time and that we need better access to information. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we have to take the time. We have to spend the time on additional review, know that you need it, and don't skim on review time. For accessibility, go ahead. So plan more review. The next one, use lists and reminders. So for accessibility, I think I mentioned this last time. One of the things that I will do is I will use lists. So I'm going to my book club and there are 20 people in my book club. I only see them once a month. I have a list of names. I can review those names before I get there so that when I get to the meeting, I can say, hi, Wendy, hi, Sue, hi, Connie, right? It makes it more accessible. The research has shown that if you have used something recently, it will be more accessible. So before you go to that social event at the synagogue, right? You look through your synagogue membership list and you say to yourself, oh, that's Janine, that's Georgia, that's Tom, you know, and imagine their face if you can. And then when you get to see them, you'll be able to say hello to them more quickly It's not a guarantee that you'll remember their name, but it will be much more accessible to your memory because you will have used it recently. That's the big issue with time. You know, we kind of move things to our brain, the things we haven't used lately go to the back, the things we've just used go to the front. You want that information that's important to you to be at the front. That's my thing saying I'm running out of time, but I'm doing okay. It's not too bad. All right, the third thing is to learn memory strategies. And next time, we're gonna spend the whole session, very practical, learning some memory strategies. Why? Because they make you review more. If you're doing strategies, you're paying more attention, you're reviewing it, you're finding meaning, developing cues, all those things that make it more likely that you'll remember. Okay, so challenge. This is my exercising brain. You see pictures in here of people kicking and playing tennis and diving and running. You need to think about your memory the same way. Memory is not one thing. We tend to say, oh, I have a good memory, I have a bad memory, as if memory is one thing. Memory is not one thing. Memory is remembering addresses, remembering names, remembering where you put things, remembering how to get places, on and on and on and on and on. There are many different types of memory, and if you want to be successful and challenge yourself, you need to do lots of different kinds of mental tasks and vary them. So people say to me, oh, Robin, I do crossword puzzles. Is that good for me? I said, yes. What else do you do? Okay. Crossword puzzles are great, but crossword puzzles are only good for word retrieval. They don't practice any other kind of memory skill. So if you want your memory to work for you when you need it, you need to try lots of different kinds of memory skills. So when you do those different kinds of memory skills, you want to focus on process and not outcome. How much time did you spend working your memory this week? How many times did you remember the things you were trying to remember? You don't want to say to yourself, I have to get 100%. 100% is outcome. Do not focus on that, especially if you haven't used those memory skills lately. It's going to take you a while to rebuild them. It's going to take you a while to get the brain at that level you want it to be at. So you need to focus on your commitment, the number of different things you're doing, the number of times that you're doing them, the number of days or hours each week you spend on focusing on your memory, not on making yourself be 100%, because that's a recipe for failure. Okay. And you want to set goals for yourself. Set goals that you will do 20 minutes one day and 20 minutes another day each week, doing a memory task that you don't normally do. Because it's not because all those memory tasks that you might do are amazingly important to you. It's because when you do want to remember something, you want those skills to be there. And if you don't use them, you're gonna lose them. Next slide. Okay, so you don't have to try and write this list down. This list is also in the memory book you're gonna get next week, next month. But these are just a possible list of things you can practice memorizing. It's not, again, it's not because this is the most important thing for you. Maybe you don't care whether you remember 3 new jokes. Maybe you don't care whether you remember the details of your last vacation. But if you work on remembering those things, your memory skills will improve. That's what it's for. Go ahead, Stacy. Okay, last thing is health. We were talking about the good aspects of our memory. So first of all, don't assume that you have dementia if you make mistakes, because normal aging leads to a lot of mistakes. We've already gone over that. Don't assume that every mistake you make is senility, you have to race to the doctor. Don't get anxious and stressed about every little thing that goes wrong. The second thing is depend on your knowledge. Know that your knowledge is there and that the world knowledge that you have can help you establish that meaning that's so important. You will not believe the number of examples I got from Stacy and Janine after I left last time, and Marlene, with people doing, using the things I said last time about trying to attach meaning to something in order to remember it. People were using what I said, which is fantastic, I love it. But they depended on the knowledge they had to establish these meanings, to establish these associations and connections, to remember things. So let yourself use that knowledge, know that it's there, know that you can count it. It will be very valuable to you when you are trying to remember. The third thing is make an effort. Make an effort, because effort pays off. You're not gonna forget it any faster than your 20-year-old or 40-year-old daughter, okay? It's going to pay off when you put that effort in to learn something, because the research clearly shows that when you focus and learn something new, it will stay with you just as much as it will a younger person. Everybody's gonna forget, nobody's gonna be 100%, but you're not gonna forget more than those younger people are going to forget. So it's worth the effort to make an effort to try and do better with your memory. And I will end with one final example from my own life. I took on a challenge recently. I took on a challenge that involved organizing about 300 people to do about 1,000 hours of volunteer work. And I took it on because it was important to me and it was important to other people. And the thing about this experience was that I really proved to myself in my mid-70s that I could do it. So that was what was really important. I made mistakes, I forgot things, but it astounded me how many things I did remember. And I'll just give you one example. One day I was at the office and someone came up and said they wanted to volunteer, and I said, okay, you know, I'm gonna assign you to volunteer at this building at this time. And she wrote it down. So she knew that she needed to remember it. But then 2 seconds later, she said to me, oh, she said, I want my husband to come with me. And I said, well, we don't really need 2 people at that location. I need to assign you to a different place so that you and your husband can both contribute as volunteers. So I told her that, she made a note of that, but later she only remembered the first assignment. And she called me, and I forget if she called me or I called her that day. See, I just forgot something, I don't care. So what was interesting to me was that when we did talk, she said, oh, well, we're in this place and they, you don't really need me here, there's so many people here. And I said, well, don't you remember? And this was 4 days before when you came up to me and got your volunteer assignment, we changed that so that we would have a place for you and your husband. And to me, the amazing thing was that 4 days later, I remembered that without any note, without any support, it just came back to me. So it was an amazing experience to me. My brain was clicking on all cylinders when I was doing this work. I was working on it 24/7 for a month. But it was so gratifying to be able to do that in your mid-70s, to be able to take on a big challenge and to be able to do it. So I encourage you all not to be afraid of those challenges. Thank you very much. These are the legitimate code.
I also don't want you to be
Questions?
humble. I want you to tell them also about your hot tour and your experience. Just say it,
It's not a memory test.
but it's an acuity test.
Okay,
It's an acuity test that you challenged yourself
It's a challenge,
over the
yes.
course of 20, has it been 20 years?
It's been 30.
I'm telling.
So, in May, I'm going to do the hot tour the first week in May at B'nai Israel in Gainesville. And it will be the final hot tour that I need to do to have done the full annual cycle of Shabbat hot Torah. Janine thinks this is amazing. You know, I've just done it for so many years. I discovered about 5 years ago that because I've always volunteered, I actually had done most of them. So then I made myself a goal that I was going to finish them all. And as of next May, I will have done it. So that's fine. Questions about our talk today? Yes.
Plug in genetics.
Genetics are extremely important. In fact, genetics are very important for dementia. People who get dementia before they're 60, it usually has a very strong genetic connection. So we can't forget genes. We know that genes affect memory, just like intelligence. The research has shown that about 50% of our intellectual ability is due to our genetic background. And same is true for memory. So you have to work with what you got and just try and think about your potential and do as much as you can to reach your best potential. Yeah.
Can you tell me how one would know when you're forgetting a lot and you show dementia, when one would need to take the safety test to identify if you have dementia?
That's a hard question. She's asking how you know when to take the test to see if you have dementia. I would talk to your regular physician first. And see whether or not your regular physician recommends that you go in for a more detailed analysis. But one of my concerns, is that especially 10 years ago, it may be less true now, but especially 10 years ago, there were many people diagnosed with dementia incorrectly. That's one of my concerns. A second, because people were making the diagnosis without knowing them. A second concern is that there are many reasons why it might look like you have dementia. I didn't go into this today, but there are vitamin deficiencies that make you have memory problems. There are cardiovascular issues that make you have memory problems. These can be fixed. So you don't want to go into a doctor and say, you know, I'm having these problems and have him say to you, oh, it's probably Alzheimer's and you need to worry about this the rest of your life, when it might be something you can fix. So one of my recommendations is talk to your regular physician, and if he has concerns or she has concerns, then go in for a full workup. And don't skimp on any tests that are recommended to you, because there are many things that cause what looks like dementia that are curable. And one of them is depression, okay? Depression is sometimes called pseudo-dementia, because when you are depressed, you don't want to make memory efforts. So it's really important that you have a full workup. Yeah.
I'm fortunate to have a 95-year-old father who his memory is great.
Yay.
He's never been good with short-term memory, or names ever. But
Names are hard.
he tells me stories that my mother didn't fill in all the blanks that are the best part of the stories. You're talking to us about short-term versus long-term.
I didn't get into it in detail. Immediate memory is 30 seconds to a minute.
Okay.
That's what I said is okay. Yeah. Steve, you go to this. Yeah, I wanted this to be up. Yeah.
So we've gone through all the things to practice to help remember that kind of stuff. How do you feel that physical, like exercise, about timber, do any of that stuff, does that make a difference?
Exercise is extremely important for memory, because think about it. You need to get blood to your brain for your brain to work. And there is very, very good research that shows that both physical exercise and mental exercise help your memory. Both kinds. I don't know about hyperbaric chambers. I don't know that very much, so I can't comment on that. But physical and mental exercise is extremely important. One of my frustrations is that I spent my whole career telling people that mental exercise was extremely important. And it's only been the last 10 or 15 years that the medical community has accepted that mental exercise was just as important as physical exercise. Yes, Stacey.
Can you speak to social media and memory, like maps and phone numbers no longer needing to be remembered, how that affects and what we can do to counter that?
Okay. So Stacy is asking how problematic it is that we use our phones for everything now. We look up things on our phones, we don't use our memory, we look at phone numbers, we don't use our memory. I have a mixed attitude about that, actually, because I worked for many years for the clinical psychology department in Gainesville. I ended most of my career in the regular department of psychology, but I was in the clinical psych department for a while. And I worked with patients that had severe memory failure. And I discovered that even though we were trying to teach this person to use a notebook to write things down, it was very hard for him to use a notebook and write things down. He would forget where he put his notebook. He would forget to pull it out when he needed it. He would forget that he had to write things down and then to forget to then check them later. He would write notes in his notebook and not know what they said. My point is that I believe, and this is a disagreement with some neurologists, because some neurologists will say, don't write things down, don't use your phone, make your memory do it. And my attitude is that success is more important than failure. If I succeed using my memory, that is more important than if I forget. So if I have a backup, that's fine. I should have as many backups as I need. So I will try to remember some historical facts before I look it up. But if I don't remember it, then I can look it up because I have that basically full computer in my pocket. But that doesn't bother me because I think that when we write things on our calendar, when we write phone numbers down in our directory for contacts, we are supporting our memory and making it more likely that we'll be successful. And my experience is that if you have really failed, you can't use those supports. So if you've really failed, you can't use those supports. So if you haven't really failed, use those supports. What's wrong? It will help you succeed. And I don't know the answer to the question, which is, will young people who've never depended on their memory not be as good at memorizing as we are? I don't know the answer to that. Research hasn't been done. It's an interesting question though. It may very well be that today's generation of 20-somethings and 30-somethings aren't going to have the memory skills that we have because we depended on them more our whole life. I don't know the answer to that, but wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
What does it mean when you have a tendency, and I'm speaking about my mother's 89, living independent living. And when I'm talking to her, she focuses on the past, and she can remember a lot in the past we have been so, but the current, she forgets what she's always forgotten anything. Less be trying to speak about, is that dementia?
Well, there's two things in there. You're saying that your mother is 89, is independent living, okay? And you're saying that when you're talking to her, she wants to focus on the past and not on new information. That's easier. That's the easy way out. Because that past information, that world knowledge, that those things we've known all the time, they're still there. And in fact, even with dementia, the last thing we lose are our own personal memories from when we were young. They tend to stay the longest. I can't tell you whether she has dementia or not, based on the example you gave me. I can tell you that she's taking the easy way out by not trying to remember the names of people around her. Yes.
Just a couple tips. I'm so adamant about putting things back in the same exact place.
Excellent.
Things I know I'm gonna lose, I have this strap to my phone with a key attached to it.
Yeah, great.
Because I know the tools. Also, when I wake up in the morning, believe it or not, first thing I do is I look at my calendar on my phone. However, I write a list down on what I'm gonna do for the day. And then I cross it off. But the first thing I do, but my husband always goes, why, what takes me so long? Like, take the time to bring things back. Because I know, you don't follow those rules.
Yeah, having what I call memory places is extremely important. And in my book, Memory Fitness Over 40, you'll find a section about using memory places. So your glasses always go in the same place, your keys always go in the same place, your phone always goes in the same place. For me, I have maybe 4 different memory places for my phone. It's 98% of the time it's in one of those 4 places. But it's very important to use those support systems so that you can be successful. What I do is on Monday morning or Sunday, sometimes I look at my whole week and try to get my whole week in, here. Because I might run into a friend in the grocery store who says, can we have lunch on Thursday? And I say, no, I'm busy on Thursday because I know my schedule. So that's how I do it. And then I do check it daily to make sure I haven't forgotten something. But yes, any way you can support your memory is actually good, as long as you're using your memory a lot. That's it, use your memory a lot, yeah. One more question, Karen?
Important is it to declutter? Because I know my memory feels so much healthier with my desks. And it's been true throughout my house. So how important is it to people to declutter their?
I think declutter is an individual preference. So for me, I have stacks and stacks and stacks, but I know what's in each stack. And that helps me to not forget that this thing has to be done before the end of the week, or that thing has to be done before the end of the week. Other people find clutter impossible to deal with. My husband hates any kind of clutter. So I have 2 rooms in the house that are mine and they are very cluttered. The rest of the rooms in the house are decluttered for now. But that's an individual preference. And someone, who was talking to me in the last talk told me how she has piles of stuff all over her office, and that's the way she organizes things, and that's fine. And other people would walk in and say, that's clutter, oh my God, you know, but it's fine for her. All right, thank you very much for your question.